Hi everyone, you may have heard that Spain have just passed a new law that will come into effect on the 23rd of November. This means that if you're travelling to Spain or any of the islands from a high-risk country, you will need to present a negative PCR test at the airports. Now it's important to say, if you follow me because you enjoy the videos that we make about the Canary Islands and Fuerteventura, this piece of legislation from Spain is separate to the legislation that came in regarding tourist accommodation. The two will actually run side by side. So first and foremost, it's important that if you are planning on travelling to Spain soon, that you can actually make it through the airport and out the other side. And this is what this legislation covers. Now, the legislation has come in because the EU have asked for a coordinated approach from all the EU countries in managing COVID and dealing with travel and people coming from higher risk areas. So there's a map that's been produced that has colour coding. It's sometimes referred to the EU traffic light system. All of the data shows how severe each country's current infection rate is, and they will determine whether that country is high risk. So I can tell you now at the moment, I'll try and put the map up here for you, pretty much everywhere across Europe and a lot of other countries as well will be categorised as red, and therefore if you're coming to Spain from the 23rd of November onwards, you will need to present a negative PCR test. Now this test must be a PCR test according to the decree. It can't be any other kind of rapid antigen test or any other sort of test that hasn't been endorsed by the EU. So PCR test only for this, and it needs to have been done no older than 72 hours before your arrival date. So there is quite a short time frame for this. Now, all of the arrivals into Spain from international areas currently have to complete a passenger locator form, and that won't change with this legislation. So again, I'll put the website up here, and I'll also link it down in the video description so that you know where to go to complete the passenger locator form. On that form, it asks you a number of questions about health, around where you're staying, and from the 23rd of November there will be an additional question on there asking you to confirm that you have a negative PCR test. Now, when you're boarding aircraft to actually travel to Spain, the airlines will check that you have the correct QR code that's generated when you complete the passenger locator form, and they may also ask to see the negative PCR test as well. So there is the possibility of being denied boarding if you don't have the correct documentation. Now, when you arrive in Spain as an international arrival, that QR code is scanned. You also have to pass through a temperature screening, and this is done with thermal imaging cameras. So most of the time you won't even notice that it's being done. They will also then look through once you've had your QR code scanned, and they may ask you to produce your PCR certificate. Now, the decree on this states that everybody has to have one, but obviously if there's lots of full flights arriving, they may just select certain people to check that they've got that in place. Now, if for whatever reason you arrive and you don't have a negative PCR test, the decree does state that there are fines that can be paid, and you would also then need to pass a local PCR test at your own expense, and there are potentially quite substantial fines for not complying with this, and also the possibility of not being allowed entry into the country. So the law on this is very, very clear. You have to have a PCR test that is negative at your country of origin. So there's no real scope within this legislation to take a test on arrival. It must be done before you travel. The legislation doesn't have any age limits at all, so at the moment it just says all passengers, so you can assume that this will apply to everybody, including small children. Now, if that's updated at any point or any further advice is given out, again, I'll link that down in the description below. But for now, the decree has come out this morning and it says all passengers. Now, what you need to do with this is make sure that the PCR test gives you a certificate of some kind. That can be on a piece of paper or it can be on an email. It must have your name, some sort of identity number or passport number, the date that the test was carried out, as well as the lab that performed the test, and confirmation of a negative PCR result. Now this legislation will only apply at airports and ports, and it will be the first point of entry into Spain. So if you're travelling by car through Europe into Spain, there is no check at the land border because one doesn't exist, so this won't apply to you. But if you're flying into Spain or into any of the islands, you will need a test. If you're travelling domestically, so if you already live in Spain and you want to travel to the islands, or if you live on one of the islands here like we do and we want to travel to another island, that's classed as domestic travel, and this doesn't apply because as domestic travellers we don't complete the locator form. But if you are coming from any other high-risk country into Spain, regardless of what type of passport you hold or whether you have residency, you will need to provide a test. There are no exclusions on this at all. If you're coming from one of the red countries, you have to present a test. This legislation has no end date at the moment, so the decree simply says that it will carry on until such point as the Spanish government deem it no longer necessary. And it is being done in conjunction with the EU, so there are certain EU countries already with similar policies in place, and the likelihood is that other countries within the EU that don't currently ask for tests will probably start to ask for them over the next couple of months. So we can expect airlines, ferry companies, government websites like the FCO to update their websites in the next few days with all the details on this, but the take-home message is very clear. If you're travelling to Spain, or including the islands, from a high-risk country from the 23rd of November onwards, you will need to present a negative PCR test. That applies to everybody in your party, regardless of age, and you need to make sure you have proof of the test, either on paper or an email, and that may also be requested before you board the plane, so you may be denied boarding if you don't have the right documentation. It's also important to briefly mention the legislation that's happening here in the Canary Islands. So this covers checking into tourist accommodation, regulated accommodation like hotels or VV licensed private rentals. They also have a responsibility to check that you have a negative result. So you will still need to present your test to the hotel check-in desk or the owner of the rental, as well as presenting it at the airport. So just remember on this that the 72-hour period will need to cover the time that you check into your accommodation. Don't just factor in the time that you're due to land at the airport, because you need to make sure you've got adequate time to travel and complete that check-in process. There is no provision to have testing on arrival now as a result of the legislation happening at airports. You won't be able to clear the airport unless you've had a test. The provision to do that on arrival really isn't there within this legislation. It must be done at the origin airport. So make sure you're well prepared. I know that testing, particularly in the UK and Ireland, is very expensive. There is one solution that I've found that's slightly cheaper for you at the moment whilst that discount code is working. I'll leave it in the description of the video. I have no affiliation with them at all. It's just something that I've found online. If it's helpful, please use it. But also use the comments section. If you're travelling soon and you found what you think is a good solution for this, feel free to share it with other people, and let's try and help each other out so that we don't have to pay £150 or whatever it is per test. I'm sure there's some cheaper options out there. Thanks ever so much for watching, and if you're wondering where the regular vlog is, that will be with you tomorrow, which is Friday. It's uploading as we speak. We had a really good weekend in Coral Echo, so if you want to see what we got up to there, go ahead and hit the subscribe button and you should get a notification when it goes live. If you found this video useful, please give it a like, feel free to share it. Go ahead and drop any questions in the comments. I'll do my best to answer them, but I should probably state at this point, I'm not a lawyer or anything, I'm not a legal advisor. I've just read through this new decree and been able to summarise it as best as I can. Take care everybody, and we'll see you again soon.